UPI for adults, which of course will take away the question of Huduma number, which was not solving the kind of problems that we intend to solve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, about single mothers who cannot produce the fathers of the children's IDs.
Honorable Speaker, it is no longer a requirement of the law for a registration of a child to include both parents. It is not a requirement. It is now possible to register one parent if you are a one-parent child. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Honorable members, will move to question 105 of 2023. Member for Mandera South.
I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I raise to ask question 105 of 2023. Could the Cabinet Secretary, 1, state the measures being taken to establish civil registration centers in every sub-county in the country so as to ease access to civil registration services? 2, state the measures the ministry is putting in place to immediately set up a civil registration at Elwak and Kutulo sub-counties in Mandera South to serve the huge population in the region, considering that the closest civil registration center to Mandera South constituency is located nearly 220 kilometers away from Mandera town and also serves Mandera North, Mandera West, Banisa, and Lafe constituencies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, this is nearly similar to the question of Mother Wangari, so we shouldn't spend too much time on this. Answer the question, and I'll allow one bite by the member who asked and one more member. Go ahead, Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, just as I have told the House on the issue of operationalization of the administrative units that are gazetted and not operational, we are finalizing a criteria which will help us implement the recommendations of this House in the motion which was cited by the Honorable Member for Gilgil, to make sure that every sub-county has a civil registry. So what we've done is that we have taken the remainder of all, we have taken the list of all the sub-counties that do not have a civil registry, and we want to implement, because there are quite many, unlike the sub-counties, we want to implement that motion in the next 5 years, but based on a criteria. That criteria, just as in the first case with sub-counties, will be as follows. First of all, those that will get centers, because right now, Mr. Speaker, if I can explain this for half a minute, at the moment, we are opening these centers on the request of individual members of parliament. Like I cited the Kajiado North, it was a request by the MP. I cited Imenti South. The member for Imenti South, who can confirm, is the one who wrote and requested for a center. And we felt that perhaps we should have an objective criteria so that, again, we make sure that that implementation of the recommendation of this House is done fairly, equitably, and making sure that every part of the country is covered. So the criteria will involve, first of all, regional diversity, so that we pick in the first year, every region of our country will be represented in those that will be open this year, but also special and unique circumstances like topography, hardship, population, and so forth. Going forward, to avoid, complaints, public complaints, at a future date, now that this tradition of ministers appearing before the House has begun, I'll be more than happy later on, when the opportunity happens, to provide an update to the House where we are, the criteria we are using. By that time, we'll have adopted it, and then the rollout to ensure that no part of the country is favored and no part of the country will be left out. In fact, on the Wajir issue, generally northern Kenya, upper eastern, upper coast, pastoral areas generally, I think special attention will be given to those areas because I have been there and I know it is quite challenging when one has to travel, as was the case raised by the member for Lamu East. You use 10,000 shillings to go and look for a birth certificate. Another Kenyan is using matatu and paying 50 bob to and fro. But all these factors will be taken into consideration because we want an equitable country and a country where public policy is informed by objective criteria. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I thank the minister for the answer. Probably most of the answers that I would have wanted had been preempted in the previous question.
I feel the same.
Yeah. So, but I will say, first of all, we have dwelled so much on birth certificates, but a functioning civil registration center and service actually has three very important events. That is registration of births, registration of marriages, and also registration of deaths. And even if we go digital, Mr. Speaker, sir, even if we go digital, you know, registration alone is not enough because the civil registration service has to provide the certificate as a proof of that registration. And that is why we are asking for physical facility and officers who would be in those centers. To put what I'm particularly in my constituency, when I mentioned Elwak and I mentioned Kutulo, those are two sub-counties in one constituency, vastly, you know, spread apart. Mandera town, where the civil registration center is, the only civil registration center we have in Mandera County, is 220 kilometers from Elwak. And I'm sure the cabinet secretary knows the problems that are there traveling between Elwak and Mandera, especially with the menace from those bad guys from across the border. That road has been a very risky road, especially when you are traveling between Elwak and Mandera, and also between Kutulo and Elwak. So you travel 220 kilometers, and the only bus...
Honorable member, you are now making a speech.
Okay, the only bus that you use for transport between those is the bus that comes from Nairobi. That's what you wait for, so that you can hike it to Mandera. So my plea to the cabinet secretary is that a sub-county like Elwak and Kutulo, which are some of the oldest in that region, surely require civil registration centers very urgently, because of the importance of those certificates that the Honorable Mother Wangari had mentioned earlier. You know, the NEMIS. If you want to travel with your child from Mandera now, you cannot take that child on the flight if they don't have a birth certificate. And this all is a challenge, and we require those documents in Mandera. I think the answers that have been given, the usual answers that we hear when government gives answers to, you know, lack of facilities, lack of officers, lack of funding. These are answers which...
Honorable Harrow, you are debating.
Okay, sir.
I gave you an opportunity to ask a supplementary if you feel your question was not sufficiently answered. So
what the Honorable Cabinet Secretary mentioned, that some of the initiatives come from the MPs. And I have the benefit of having a copy of his written answer. And he had mentioned of partnership between the Member of Parliament and the national government offices on the ground. I would want to know, what would that partnership look like? How does it manifest itself? Because we would really want to initiate those initiatives and see what that partnership can do to help our people on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Rindikiri, one question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the PS for the confidence. He has answered our questions, but I have a problem, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the issuance of passports. There are some questions that I think that form need to be reviewed, particularly on the fathers, mothers, and even the children, some of who could be deceased. I don't